She helped a beggar not knowing he's the CEO. Arab executive disguised himself in search of true love. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Layla, a young woman with a heart as big as her dreams, walked down the crowded street of downtown Cairo. The hustle and bustle of the city never stopped, but today, something felt different. She noticed a man sitting by the alley, his clothes ragged, his eyes weary. He looked out of place. A man of his stature, or at least what she thought he might be, shouldn't be sitting on the cold concrete. But there he was, hunched over, shivering in the cold. "Are you okay?" Layla asked as she kneeled beside him, her voice soft and compassionate. He looked up, his face hidden by a tattered hood. "I'm fine," he said in a hoarse voice. "Just a little down on my luck." Without thinking twice, Layla took off her scarf and wrapped it around his shoulders. "You shouldn't be out here like this. Here, take this." She reached into her bag and handed him the last of her food, a simple sandwich, along with some spare change. His eyes flickered, but he didn't speak. As Layla turned to leave, she didn't notice the gleam in his eyes, the hidden power behind them. His name? Zayd Al-Fahim, CEO of the world-renowned Al-Fahim Enterprises. But today, he was no more than a beggar, hiding behind his own walls, desperate to find something real, something genuine, something pure. Zayd had spent the last few weeks traveling across cities, disguised as a beggar, trying to understand people's hearts. He wanted to see who would love him without the luxury of his wealth and power. But even as he sat on the cold streets of Cairo, asking for change, he realized how invisible he had become to the world. People looked past him, ignored him, and walked by without a second thought. It was in those moments of invisibility that he found himself yearning for something far deeper than money. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a message from his assistant, a reminder of an upcoming board meeting for Al-Fahim Enterprises. But it was the last thing he wanted to think about. He wasn't interested in boardrooms or quarterly earnings right now. He was interested in something real. He was searching for an answer that no amount of money could provide: true love. It was then that he saw her. Layla. Her figure emerged through the crowd like a burst of light in the dim cityscape. She walked with purpose, her eyes soft but determined. Her demeanor was humble, as though the weight of the world rested on her shoulders, yet she carried it effortlessly. Zayd's breath hitched. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put into words. She was different. As she passed him, her eyes met his for a brief moment. She didn't look away like most people did. She paused. She didn't see a beggar. She saw someone who needed help. Her kindness shone through her eyes, and without a word, she dropped some coins in his cup. Then, without hesitation, she reached into her bag and pulled out the last of her sandwich, offering it to him with a soft smile. "You shouldn't be out here like this," she said, concern in her voice. "Take care of yourself." Zayd's heart pounded in his chest. This was no ordinary woman. She wasn't afraid of him. She didn't see him as a millionaire, a CEO, or someone to pity. She saw him as a human being. As she turned to walk away, Zayd wanted to stop her, to tell her who he really was. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the fear that she would see him as just another man using his wealth to buy affection. Or maybe it was the hope that this time, the connection would be real, that she would love him for who he was, not what he had. The following days were filled with restless nights for Zayd. He couldn't get Layla out of his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, her smile, the warmth in her eyes. He hadn't felt this way in years, not since he had been a child, full of hope and dreams before the world had turned cold and business-driven. Zayd decided that he needed to see her again, to find out more about the woman who had been the only one to show him kindness in such a long time. But how could he approach her? He had no idea who she was, or what she did. So, he did what any billionaire in disguise would do. He did some research. It didn't take long to find out that Layla wasn't just any woman. She was a successful, independent social worker who ran her own charity. She dedicated her life to helping the homeless, the forgotten ones, people like him. She had a passion for making a difference, and her selflessness was evident in everything she did. Layla wasn't just beautiful on the outside, but her heart was pure. Zayd found himself admiring her more with every piece of information he uncovered. Yet, the deeper he went into her world, the more he realized how different their lives were. Layla didn't know it yet, but he was someone she couldn't even imagine. The CEO of Al-Fahim Enterprises, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the Middle East. Would she still want him if she knew who he truly was? He needed to know. So, he made a decision. He would seek her out, face to face, and reveal who he really was. It was time to stop hiding behind the veil of a beggar. A few days later, Zayd found himself standing outside Layla's office building. He was dressed in a simple, yet expensive, suit, his hair neatly combed, but there was still something about him that felt different, something that made him stand out in a crowd without his wealth. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a man searching for something he had lost. As he walked through the entrance, his nerves got the best of him. His hands were clammy, and his heart raced. Would she recognize him? Would she run away in shock or disbelief? He didn't know. Layla was seated at her desk, typing away at her computer when she noticed him. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and she froze. The man she had helped weeks ago, the beggar, was now standing before her, dressed in an expensive suit, his face confident and composed. Her heart skipped a beat. Zayd? Layla's voice was barely a whisper, her confusion written all over her face. What are you doing here? Zayd smiled, his eyes warm and earnest. Layla, I'm not who you think I am. I never was. She stood up slowly, taking a step back. Who are you really? I'm Zayd Al-Fahim, the CEO of Al-Fahim Enterprises. Layla's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a man she had helped on the street. This was a man who had the world at his feet, a man she could never have imagined in her wildest dreams. You're the CEO? Layla stammered, her mind racing. Why would you pretend to be? Zayd took a deep breath, stepping forward. Because I needed to know if anyone would love me for who I truly am, not for my wealth or my title. You were the only one who saw me for who I really am, Layla. The revelation left Layla speechless. The man she had helped was not just any ordinary person. He was the CEO of a massive company. She felt a rush of emotions, disbelief, anger, confusion, but most of all, betrayal. Had everything between them been a lie? Was he only using his disguise to see if she would love him? But as she stood there, staring at Zayd, she couldn't deny the connection they had formed. He hadn't asked her for anything. He hadn't tried to impress her with his wealth. He had simply accepted her kindness and reciprocated it with his own. I don't know what to say, Layla whispered, her voice barely audible. Zayd stepped closer, his eyes softening. I understand if you're upset. I never meant to deceive you. But I couldn't risk losing you because of who I am. Layla's heart ached as she met his gaze. This wasn't about wealth or status. This was about something deeper, something she hadn't felt in a long time, trust. But could she trust him now? Could she trust a man who had lied to her, even if it was for the right reasons? I need time to think, Layla said, her voice shaky. I don't know if I can just move past this, Zayd. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Layla avoided Zayd's calls, unsure of how to process everything she had learned. She wasn't just rejecting the man she had come to care for, she was rejecting the very idea of who he was. A man who had everything. A man who could have anyone. But Zayd wasn't giving up. He knew that he had to show her that his love for her was real. He wasn't interested in playing games or hiding behind his wealth anymore. He wanted Layla, the real Layla, not just the woman he thought he knew. So, he began to show up at her charity events, supporting her work, helping her with the projects she cared about. He wasn't looking for accolades or recognition. He simply wanted to prove to her that he wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who loved her. Days passed, and Layla found herself lost in her thoughts. She had never been one to shy away from tough decisions, but this was different. This was Zayd, the man who had captured her heart with his vulnerability, his kindness, and his raw honesty. Yet, in the back of her mind, doubts lingered. Was he really the man he claimed to be, or was he simply playing a game, pretending to be someone he wasn't? Zayd had asked for time, and Layla couldn't help but feel guilty for taking so long to process everything. She had always been a woman who acted from her heart, but now, she found herself questioning whether her heart could truly handle a relationship with someone like him. A man with wealth, power, and a public life she wasn't sure she could fit into. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at the charity, Layla sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the city lights outside her window. She thought about the people she had helped, the lives she had touched, and the difference she was making in the world. But there was an emptiness now, a void that only Zayd seemed to fill. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Zayd. Layla, I know I've asked for your forgiveness, and I understand if you need more time. But I can't stop thinking about you. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Please, let me show you who I truly am. Not the CEO, not the businessman, just me. I'm waiting for you. Take your time, but don't take too long. She stared at the message, her chest tightening. Zayd wasn't just asking for forgiveness, he was offering her a chance to see him for who he truly was. To love him for his heart, not his title. But could she do that? Could she love him unconditionally, without the baggage of his wealth and status? Layla took a deep breath, wiped away a stray tear, and put her phone down. She had made her decision. It was time to meet him. The following day, Layla arranged to meet Zayd at one of her favorite places in Cairo. A quiet, little cafe tucked away from the busy streets. It was a place where she could be herself, where the world seemed to fade into the background, and only the present moment mattered. Zayd was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking out the window. He didn't see her at first, and for a moment, Layla simply watched him. He wasn't the CEO now. He wasn't the powerful businessman who controlled billions. He was just a man, sitting alone, waiting for her. And for the first time since their initial meeting, she felt the stirrings of something real. When he looked up and saw her standing there, a soft smile spread across his face. His eyes, those eyes that had captivated her from the moment they met, held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Layla," he said softly, standing up to greet her. "I'm so glad you came." She smiled nervously, then sat down across from him. They were silent for a moment, both unsure of where to begin. But the tension in the air wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that existed between two people who were about to say something important. Finally, Layla spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, Zayd. About us, about what we have, and I'm scared." Her voice wavered as she spoke. "I'm scared that you're going to hurt me. That your world, your life, is too much for me to handle." Zayd's expression softened, and he reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "Layla, I'm not asking you to fit into my world. I'm asking you to join me in it. We don't have to have everything figured out. We don't have to have all the answers. But I'm asking you to take this journey with me." Tears welled in Layla's eyes as she looked at him. She had always been the strong one, the one who helped others, the one who had to keep everything together. But in Zayd's eyes, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see in a long time. The possibility of vulnerability, of letting someone else carry part of the weight. "I don't know what the future holds, Zayd," she whispered. "But I'm willing to find out. With you." As Layla and Zayd's relationship blossomed, they were forced to face not only their own fears and insecurities but also the external pressures that came with their vastly different worlds. Zayd's company was constantly under threat from rivals, and his enemies were more than willing to use Layla as a pawn in their game. One evening, Zayd sat in his office, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The latest threat against Al Fahim Enterprises had hit close to home. A former business partner had turned against him, and now Zayd's enemies were using Layla's charity as leverage. They threatened to expose the charity's financial dealings, hoping to tarnish Zayd's reputation and damage his empire. Zayd clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. He had worked his entire life to build something meaningful, and now, it seemed like it was all slipping away because of the very people who had once been his closest allies. But the thought of losing Layla, of seeing her hurt because of his past, was the one thing he couldn't bear. He picked up his phone and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "Layla," he said, his voice low and serious. "I need to tell you something. There are people trying to use you against me. They're threatening to expose your charity, to ruin everything you've worked for." Layla's heart sank. She had known there would be risks involved, but hearing it from Zayd's mouth made it all too real. "I'll fight for you, Layla. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, protect us," Zayd continued. "But you need to be prepared. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about both of us." Layla's mind raced. She knew the risks, but she also knew that she couldn't back down. She had fought too hard for everything she had built. She had worked tirelessly for the people she helped, and she wasn't going to let anyone destroy that. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice steady. "We'll face this together, Zayd. Whatever comes, we'll face it side by side." Zayd's heart swelled with pride at her strength. She wasn't just the woman he loved, she was his equal, his partner, and together, they would fight against whatever came their way. The stakes had never been higher. Zayd's company, his life's work, and Layla's charity were both at risk. But as they navigated the challenges, their bond only grew stronger. They faced every obstacle, every threat, with courage and determination. Their love was no longer just about passion and connection. It was about trust, resilience, and the willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. Together, they were unstoppable. But just when they thought they had overcome the worst, a new challenge emerged. one that would test not only their relationship but their very future. As the city of Cairo buzzed with the final showdown between Zayd's company and their rivals, Layla received an unexpected visitor. A man, cloaked in shadows, entered her office with a message that would change everything. "Layla," he said, his voice cold and menacing, "there's something you don't know about Zayd al-Fahim. And I'm here to make sure you never find out." The air in Layla's office grew cold, the weight of the mysterious man's words pressing heavily on her chest. She stared at him, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Who was this man, and why was he suddenly revealing things about Zayd? The man's features were obscured by a dark hood and shadows, his face hidden from view. But his voice was unmistakable, sharp and menacing. "I'm here to warn you, Layla," the man continued, his voice low and ominous. "Zayd al-Fahim is not who you think he is. There are things about him, things you won't be able to ignore once you know. You'll want to leave him once you learn the truth." Layla felt a knot form in her stomach. What was he talking about? Zayd had shown her nothing but kindness and honesty. But now, this man was claiming that Zayd had secrets, dangerous ones. The man's gaze never wavered from hers as he spoke again. "Zayd is hiding something from you, something that could destroy everything you've worked for. You think you're in love with him? It's a dangerous game, Layla. His enemies aren't just going to give up because you two are in love. They will destroy you both, piece by piece, until nothing remains." Layla stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone on her desk. But the man stepped forward quickly, blocking her path. His presence was overpowering, and she could feel the tension building in the room. "Don't think about calling him," the man warned, his eyes narrowing. "He's already involved in things far beyond his control. People like him don't come clean. They destroy everything they touch." Layla took a step back, her heart pounding as she processed his words. Was this really true? Was Zayd hiding something from her? Was she in love with a man whose past could tear everything apart? "I don't believe you," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "Zayd is a good man. He's been nothing but kind to me, and he would never hurt me." The man smirked, his eyes glinting with cold amusement. "You're in denial, but it's only a matter of time before the truth comes to light. When it does, you'll understand why I'm here." He turned to leave, but before he exited the room, he dropped one final bombshell. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he said, his words chilling Layla to the core. The mysterious man's visit left Layla reeling. What did he mean by things that could destroy everything? Zayd had always been open with her about his life, his struggles, and his dreams. But now, doubt gnawed at her heart. Was there something she didn't know? Was Zayd hiding secrets, dark truths that could tear their fragile love apart? Unable to sleep, Layla spent the night going over every interaction she'd had with Zayd. He had been nothing but sincere, but the man's warning echoed in her mind. There had to be something more. She needed answers. The next morning, Layla sent Zayd a message. She needed to meet him. No distractions, no lies, just the truth. Zayd agreed immediately, asking her to meet him at the same cafe where they had first spoken of their feelings. As she made her way there, Layla's mind raced. She had to confront him. She couldn't let this mystery hang over their heads any longer. When she arrived at the cafe, Zayd was already waiting. His eyes softened when he saw her, but there was a subtle tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "Layla, you came," he said, standing up and walking toward her. He looked concerned, as if he knew something was weighing heavily on her heart. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "About everything." Zayd's expression shifted, his brows furrowing slightly. "What's going on? You're upset." "I don't want any secrets between us, Zayd," Layla said, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. "A man came to me last night. He said things, terrible things about you. He said you were hiding something, something that could destroy everything, everything we have." Zayd's face turned pale, and he sat back down, his hands clenched into fists. He took a deep breath, his eyes darkening. "Who was it?" Zayd asked, his voice cold. "What did he say?" "He didn't say much," Layla replied, her voice breaking. "Just that you weren't the man I thought you were. That your past would come back to haunt us." Zayd stood up again, running a hand through his hair. "I should have known this would happen. I should have told you everything from the start." Layla's heart sank. "What do you mean? What are you hiding from me?" Zayd's eyes met hers, full of sadness and regret. "I didn't want to hurt you, Layla. I didn't want you to think I was just another businessman, using my power to control people. But the truth is, my family is tied to a darker past. My father was involved in illegal activities, and I've spent my whole life trying to distance myself from that. Layla's breath caught in her throat. What kind of activities? Zayd hesitated for a moment before speaking again. My father was involved in organized crime. When I took over the company, I promised myself I'd make it legitimate, but the past has a way of catching up with you. There are people who want to use me to continue what my father started, and they're not going to let go easily. I thought I could protect you from all of this, but now I'm scared I've already dragged you too far into it. Layla stood there in shock, her mind racing as she tried to process what Zayd was saying. You never told me any of this. I didn't want you to see me as a product of my father's mistakes, Zayd explained. I wanted you to see me as I am now, the man I've worked so hard to become. But I've been fooling myself, thinking I could outrun the past. It's coming for me, Layla, and I'm afraid it's coming for you too. Layla stood frozen, trying to absorb the weight of his words. This wasn't just about a man who had wealth and power. This was about a man haunted by the legacy of his father's criminal empire. Zayd's fear for her safety was palpable, and Layla's heart ached for him. She had never expected this, never imagined that the man she loved could be tangled in such a web of darkness. But despite the shock, one thing was clear to Layla. Zayd hadn't chosen this life. He had worked hard to escape his father's shadow, to create something legitimate and meaningful. But the past, as it always does, had a way of catching up with him. Zayd looked at her, his eyes pleading. I need to know, do you still want to be with me, Layla? Can you accept the truth? Can you accept me, flaws and all? For a long moment, Layla stood in silence, her heart torn in two. She thought about everything they had shared, the love that had blossomed between them, the way Zayd had supported her and fought for her. He wasn't his father, he was his own man, and she could see that. I don't know what the future holds, she said quietly, her voice steady. But I know this. I love you, Zayd. And I believe in you. I believe in the man you've become. Zayd's eyes softened with relief, and he took a step forward, his hand reaching for hers. Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, Layla. I won't let anything tear us apart. As they left the cafe, Layla's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. You think you can escape your past, Zayd? You think you can hide behind a pretty face and a woman's love? I'm coming for you, and when I do, you'll have no choice but to face your legacy. The message sent a chill down Layla's spine. The enemy had finally revealed themselves, and they weren't going to stop until they had everything. Zayd squeezed her hand tightly, his jaw clenched in determination. This isn't over, Layla. It's just beginning, but together, they knew they could face whatever came their way. With love, strength, and each other, they would stand strong against the storm that was coming. The days following the ominous message were filled with tension. Zayd and Layla couldn't escape the growing sense of unease that hung over them. Every phone call, every knock at the door felt like a potential threat. The quiet of their home was now filled with an undercurrent of danger. It wasn't just Zayd's past coming back to haunt him, it was threatening to consume everything they had built together. As much as Layla wanted to bury her head in the sand and pretend everything was normal, she knew better. This was real, and it was happening right now. Zayd's enemies weren't going to wait. They had no intention of letting him go free, and now they had Layla in their sights as well. Zayd spent sleepless nights working with his security team, trying to track down every lead, every connection that could point to the people threatening him and Layla. His usual calm, collected demeanor had shifted. He was no longer just a CEO, he was a man on the run, fighting for his life, his company, and the woman he loved. But Layla wasn't about to sit idly by. She had faced countless challenges in her life and built her charity from the ground up. She had never shied away from a fight, and this time was no different. Zayd, we need to come up with a plan, she said one evening, as they sat across from each other in his penthouse. The view of Cairo's skyline was breathtaking, but inside, the air was thick with uncertainty. We can't just hide forever. We need to know who's behind all this and what their endgame is. Zayd leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. I've been thinking the same thing. But every lead I have brings me to dead ends. My father's associates are all gone, but their influence is still lingering. And now, it's all focused on us. Layla's eyes narrowed, her determination flaring. What if we turn the tables on them? What if we go after them instead of hiding? Zayd looked at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. You're suggesting we go after them? Yes, she replied. We've been living in fear for far too long. It's time we take control. We use your resources, your connections, and my experience with people to find out who these people are and what they really want. Zayd hesitated for a moment, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. But as he looked at Layla, something inside him shifted. She had always been his rock, and now, more than ever, he realized that they were stronger together. "You're right," he said finally, his voice steady. "We do this together, but we need to be smart. We need to plan carefully. We can't rush in blindly." Layla nodded. "I'm not asking you to. But we can't wait around while they tear our lives apart." The plan to confront Zayd's enemies began to take shape. They would need help, of course. Layla and Zayd could not take on this battle alone. They called upon the people they trusted most, a handful of key allies who had been loyal to Zayd and supported Layla's charity work. The first to join them was Syed, a former intelligence officer who had worked with Zayd's father years ago. Despite his past association with Zayd's family, Syed had cut ties with the criminal underworld long ago and had remained loyal to Zayd. He was a man of honor, with connections in high places, and he agreed to help them gather information. "I've heard rumors," Syed said during their first meeting, his face grim. "Your father's enemies haven't just disappeared. They've regrouped, and now, they're targeting you because they see you as a threat to their power." "Do you know who they are?" Zayd asked, his voice laced with frustration. "I'm working on it," Syed replied. "But I have a few leads. I'll need to dig deeper into some old networks. It won't be easy, but I'll find out who's behind this." Their second ally was Khalid, a trusted former bodyguard who had worked with Zayd for years. Khalid had a sharp mind and was fiercely protective of Zayd and Layla. He also had experience in security tactics and was instrumental in keeping them safe. "I'll double-check all security measures," Khalid said, his tone firm. "We'll tighten up everything, both online and offline. If anyone tries to get close, we'll be ready." Layla was relieved to have them on board. Syed and Khalid were invaluable allies, and together with Zayd's resources, they were beginning to form a solid strategy. But there was still one more ally they needed, Seraphine. Seraphine was a seer, a woman with abilities Layla had learned to trust over the years. She wasn't someone who was easily explained, but Layla had witnessed her power firsthand. Seraphine's visions had helped Layla in critical moments, guiding her toward the right decisions. "I know you need answers," Seraphine said when they called her in. "I can help you, but you need to trust me completely. My visions come with consequences. I can't promise that everything will be easy." Zayd was skeptical, but Layla had seen Seraphine's gifts at work before. "We need all the help we can get," she said. "If there's a way for Seraphine to help us uncover the truth, we need to explore it." Seraphine nodded. "I'll meditate on it. I'll try to reach beyond the surface of what you think you know. There are forces at play here that you don't fully understand yet." The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. Zayd, Layla, and their allies worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. They tracked down leads, gathered intel, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Layla couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. As much as she wanted to believe that their love was enough to overcome the obstacles in their path, she knew that their enemies would stop at nothing to tear them apart. But there was no turning back now. On the night of their first strike, everything was set in motion. Syed had tracked down the first lead, a connection to a man named Ferris, who had once worked with Zayd's father. Khalid and his security team were positioned around the building, ready for anything. Seraphine's meditations had given them insight into the enemy's next move, and they were ready to confront whoever had been pulling the strings. As Zayd and Layla approached the meeting point, their hearts pounded in unison. They knew they were walking into danger, but they also knew that they had to face it head-on. The future of their love, their lives, depended on it. "This is it," Zayd said, squeezing Layla's hand as they stood outside the building. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Layla nodded, her grip on his hand firm. "Together," she whispered, and with that, they stepped into the unknown, ready to fight for the future they both desperately wanted. The air in the building was thick with tension as Zayd and Layla, flanked by their loyal allies, approached the meeting room. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights above and the soft click of their footsteps on the polished floors were the only sounds breaking the silence. Each step they took seemed to echo louder than the last as they ventured deeper into the heart of enemy territory. It was as though the weight of their past, their present, and their future were all coiled together, leading them into this moment. Zayd's grip on Layla's hand tightened. He could feel her pulse, fast and erratic, but there was something in her eyes that told him she was ready. They had come too far to turn back now. "We've got this," Layla whispered, her voice steady but filled with the intensity of everything that had led up to this point. Zayd nodded, though his mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. They had prepared for this day for weeks, yet the reality of it all made his heart race in a way he hadn't expected. The man who had been running from his past, who had been hiding behind walls of money and power, was finally facing it, and Layla was by his side, risking everything for a future he could barely see. The room at the end of the hallway was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, almost as if the very building was watching them. Sayed and Khalid had positioned themselves in the shadows, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Seraphine had entered the building first, her aura serene but alert, and had confirmed the presence of the enemy. But there was something deeper, something unspoken, in her vision that made Layla uneasy. She hadn't shared everything with them yet, and Layla couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a bigger force at play, something they hadn't fully prepared for. They reached the door. Zayd's hand lingered on the doorknob, his eyes flicking to Layla's face. She gave him a reassuring nod. They were in this together. With a deep breath, Zayd turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty except for a single man sitting at a sleek, black desk, facing away from them. His posture was calm, almost relaxed, as though he were in complete control. Zayd's eyes immediately locked onto the man. Ferris. The name was familiar, and the memory was sharp. This man had been a trusted associate of Zayd's father, someone who had vanished from the scene after the old man's downfall. Now, here he was, waiting for them in the heart of the storm. Ferris didn't flinch as they entered, his hands folding in front of him on the desk. He didn't even look up at first, as if he were savoring the moment. But when he finally spoke, his voice was cold, measured. "You've come to make your last stand, I assume?" Ferris said with a smirk, his eyes glinting with malice as they met Zayd's. "How touching. I thought you would have learned by now that you can't outrun your past, Zayd." Zayd stepped forward, his voice low but filled with authority. "I'm not here to run anymore, Ferris. I'm here to end this. You and your allies are the ones who have been pulling the strings from the shadows, using my father's legacy to destroy everything I've built. I'm done with it." Ferris leaned back in his chair, studying Zayd for a long moment. "You think you can just wash your hands of your father's sins?" he asked. "You can't escape who you are, no matter how much you try to hide behind your charity work and your legitimate company. The truth is, Zayd, the world will never let you be anything but your father's son." Layla took a step forward, her voice calm but unwavering. "You're wrong. Zayd is not his father. He's not the man you think he is. He's built his life from the ground up, and we're not afraid of you or anyone else who thinks they can control us." Ferris turned his gaze to Layla, studying her for a moment before a cruel smile spread across his face. "Ah, so this is the woman who's been distracting him, the one he thinks he can build a future with. How quaint. Do you really think you can protect him, little girl? You don't even know who you're dealing with." Zayd's eyes narrowed. "Don't speak to her like that." Ferris's smirk only deepened. "I've been patient, Zayd. But your time is up. Your father's debts are still unpaid, and the people he worked with are still out there, waiting for you to take your place. You can't fight fate." Ferris's words stung, but Zayd refused to show weakness. He had spent his life trying to prove that he wasn't his father, and now, in this moment, it was more important than ever that he do so. "I'm not going to take his place, Ferris," Zayd said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm going to take my own path. And I'm going to make sure people like you don't get to control me or anyone else." Ferris's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it. "You're deluded. This will never end the way you think it will." Before Zayd could respond, there was a sudden noise outside the door. A series of fast, muffled footsteps. Someone was coming. Ferris's expression darkened as he stood up from his chair, a signal that something was about to go wrong. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, the door swung open. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. And then, to Layla and Zayd's shock, two men walked into the room, both dressed in dark suits. One was a familiar face, someone Zayd had trusted for years, a loyal member of his team. The other was a complete stranger, a cold, calculating figure who exuded power and authority. "Zayd," the familiar man said, his voice tight with unease. "I'm sorry, but this is beyond us now." Zayd's eyes widened as the betrayal hit him like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" The stranger stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "Your time is up, Zayd," he said. "You've been a problem for far too long. And now, you and your little girlfriend are going to pay for that." Layla's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. The man who had betrayed Zayd was one of his closest allies, someone he had trusted implicitly. The shock on Zayd's face mirrored her own. She had always known that their enemies would stop at nothing to destroy them, but she had never imagined this kind of betrayal coming from within their circle. Why? Zayd whispered, the weight of the question sinking in. The traitor smiled coldly. Because power is everything, Zayd. And in the end, your legacy is just a stepping stone for people like me. You never had a chance. Before Zayd could react, the room erupted into chaos. The chaos in the room escalated in an instant. Zayd's heart pounded as the reality of the betrayal hit him like a hammer. His trusted ally, the man who had stood by his side for years, had turned against him. His mouth went dry as his mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The traitor stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The stranger who had accompanied him stood silently by his side, the coldness in his demeanor sending a chill down Layla's spine. They were trapped. What are you going to do now, Zayd? The traitor taunted, his voice dripping with malice. You thought you could change the world? You thought you could outrun your father's legacy? But in the end, you're just a pawn, just like he was. Zayd's hands clenched into fists. His entire body tensed as the anger surged through him, but he knew he had to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not now, not when they were this close to finding the answers they needed. Layla, ever the fighter, didn't wait for Zayd to react. She stepped forward, her voice steady, though her heart raced. You're wrong. Zayd is not a pawn, and he's not his father. But you're a coward hiding behind your manipulation. And we'll expose you. The traitor sneered at her, then turned his attention back to Zayd. She's just as deluded as you are. You think you can change everything just by falling in love with some charity worker? You're weak, Zayd, you always were. The insult stung, but it only fueled Zayd's determination. He had spent his whole life working to escape the shadow of his father, to prove that he wasn't a puppet controlled by anyone. He wasn't going to let this man, or anyone else, define who he was. Before Zayd could make a move, the traitor raised his hand, signaling the stranger to advance. Zayd's security team, stationed outside, must have sensed the danger because they moved swiftly into action. The sounds of footsteps and muffled shouts echoed from the hallway as the room's tension reached its peak. But Layla didn't wait for them to act. She wasn't going to let this go down without a fight. Suddenly, she lunged at the traitor, her hand grabbing for the nearest object, a metal chair, and swinging it toward him with all the strength she could muster. The traitor dodged, but the chair struck his arm, knocking him back slightly. It was enough of a distraction for Zayd to make his move. In a flash, Zayd was on his feet, grabbing a nearby lamp and hurling it at the stranger, catching him off guard. The force of the lamp shattered the glass, and the man stumbled, temporarily disoriented. But Zayd knew this was only the beginning. The fight for their lives had just begun. Layla, get back, Zayd shouted, pulling her out of harm's way. His instincts kicked in, and he moved swiftly, his eyes scanning the room for any advantage. He could feel the heat of the betrayal burning in his chest, and all the fears of the past, the threats against them, and the uncertainty of their future collided in that moment. The traitor, now enraged, drew a weapon from inside his jacket, a sleek, black pistol. This ends now, he sneered, pointing the weapon at Zayd. Your game is over, Al-Fahim. Layla's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment where everything could fall apart. Zayd's life, their future, everything they had fought for could end in an instant. But before the traitor could pull the trigger, a loud crash rang through the air as the door behind them was violently kicked open. The figure that entered was none other than Khalid, Zayd's former bodyguard, and his security team. They stormed into the room with precision, moving fast and fluid, their training clear. Get down, Khalid shouted, firing off a warning shot to disarm the traitor. The traitor hesitated for just a moment, but it was enough for Zayd to act. In one swift motion, he lunged forward, knocking the pistol out of the traitor's hand. The weapon skidded across the floor, far out of reach. Layla stood frozen, her heart racing as she watched the scene unfold before her. The betrayal, the gunshot, the chaos, everything had happened so quickly. She had always known that their enemies would stop at nothing, but seeing it in front of her, with her life on the line, was something she couldn't have prepared for. Khalid quickly subdued the traitor, pinning him to the ground, while Sayed and the rest of the security team secured the rest of the area. Zayd turned to Layla, his chest heaving with exertion. Are you all right? Layla nodded, though her hands were shaking. I'm fine. But Zayd, what now? This is just one piece of the puzzle. We don't know who else is involved. And they'll be back. Zayd's face hardened with resolve. He knew Layla was right. This was only the beginning. The past wasn't done with them yet. But for the first time in a long time, Zayd felt like he was ready to face whatever came next, not as a man running from his past, but as a man fighting for his future, for Layla, and for everything they had together. "We take it one step at a time," Zayd said, his voice steady. "We'll find out who's pulling the strings. And when we do, we'll end this once and for all." As the traitor was taken away, Zayd and Layla stood alone in the silence that followed the storm. The adrenaline was still coursing through their veins, and the gravity of what had just happened was beginning to set in. Layla had never been so scared in her life. She had never imagined that something as simple as their love would lead to this kind of danger. But now, she had no choice but to confront the reality of their situation. Zayd stood by her side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You were amazing," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Layla smiled faintly, though the exhaustion in her eyes was apparent. "We're in this together. I'm not going anywhere." Zayd pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close. For a moment, they just stood there, allowing the silence to surround them, both trying to make sense of the events that had just transpired. The danger wasn't over, and they both knew that, but in that moment, they found solace in each other's arms. "This isn't over," Zayd whispered, his lips brushing against her hair. "But we'll get through it. Together." The days following the chaos at Zayd's penthouse were filled with preparations for the final confrontation. The traitor had been arrested, and with him came a wealth of information about the people who had been behind the attacks on Zayd and his company. But there were still many unanswered questions, namely, who else was involved in the web of betrayal? Who was truly pulling the strings? Zayd and Layla, united by their shared struggle, knew they could not rest until they had taken down everyone responsible for threatening their lives. They were no longer running from the past. They were facing it head-on, together. "We need to go to the top," Syed said one afternoon, after going through the files on the traitor's associates. "The person pulling the strings is someone higher up, someone with enough power to remain in the shadows." Layla nodded, her jaw set in determination. "Then we go to the top. No more hiding, no more games." Zayd looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration and love. The woman who had once been his source of fear, the one who could so easily walk away from this chaotic world, was now the one who gave him strength to fight for their future. "I'm with you," he said simply. "No matter what." As they dug deeper into the conspiracy, they began to unravel a network of corruption that had stretched across borders and industries. Zayd's father's legacy had indeed cast a long shadow, but it wasn't just his father's enemies who were after him. There were powerful figures within Zayd's own company, figures who had been feeding off the empire his father built and manipulating his every move for years. One name stood out above all others, a man known only as Elias Black. A former partner of Zayd's father, Elias had been in the background, quietly orchestrating much of the manipulation. He had learned everything he could about Zayd's weaknesses and had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With their network in place, Zayd and Layla prepared for the final showdown. This time, it wasn't just about protecting Zayd's legacy or their future. It was about taking down the entire system that had tried to destroy them and everyone they loved. "I'm ready," Zayd said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Let's end this." The confrontation came at last, in the heart of the corporate world Zayd had tried so hard to distance himself from. The final battle wasn't going to be a physical one, it was going to be a battle of wits, power, and influence. They met Elias Black in a high-rise office building that overlooked the city. The man was everything Zayd had feared, cold, calculating, and ruthless. He was everything Zayd had despised about his father's business associates. "You're too late, Zayd," Elias said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous kind of satisfaction. "Your father's legacy is already mine. You were never meant to carry it. You were weak, just like him." Zayd's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "I'm not my father, Elias. And I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've built." Elias laughed, the sound hollow and chilling. "You think you can stop me? I've been pulling the strings for far too long. You're nothing but a pawn in this game. And you always will be." But Zayd was done being anyone's pawn. "I'm not your pawn. I never was. And I'm taking back what's mine." With a series of well-placed legal maneuvers, strategic moves from Layla's charity network, and the evidence they had gathered, Zayd exposed Elias Black for the criminal mastermind he was. The man who had been hiding in the shadows for so long was finally brought to light. Elias was arrested, his empire crumbling in a matter of hours. For the first time in his life, Zayd felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had not only defeated his father's legacy but had also secured a future that was truly his own. The dust settled, and life slowly returned to normal. The company was officially handed over to Zayd, but this time, it was different. There were no more shadows lurking behind him, no more enemies plotting his downfall. Zayd's vision for Al Fahim Enterprises was now centered on innovation, growth, and a better future, one that didn't rely on power games or manipulation. Layla stood beside him as they watched the city skyline from his office, her hand resting gently in his. "We did it," Layla said, a soft smile on her face. "We made it through." Zayd smiled, turning to face her. "We did, and it's because of you. You kept me grounded, you reminded me of who I really am, not my father, not my legacy, but me." She shrugged playfully, her eyes bright. "I just did what anyone in love would do. I believed in you." Zayd took her hand, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "You've always believed in me, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." Together, they stood in the office, the city stretching out before them, their future now filled with endless possibilities. A few weeks later, Zayd and Layla stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the setting sun painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. It was a peaceful evening, a far cry from the turmoil they had experienced only months before. "You know," Layla said softly, gazing out at the view, "I always wondered what it would be like to be with someone who had everything. But now I realize, you've given me everything I could ever need." Zayd turned to her, his eyes filled with love. "I haven't given you everything. I'm still working on that. But I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." Layla smiled, her heart full. "I believe you." And as they stood together, hand in hand, looking out at the horizon, they knew that no matter what came their way, they could face it together. The past was behind them, the future was uncertain, but their love was the one thing they could always count on.